And we're going to pick up here talking about, I think I'm recording, hold on. There we go. Okay, so it's recording right now. Talking about the branches of your autonomic nervous system. So we say that the autonomic nervous system has two main divisions. We have parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the ANS. So the ANS is the autonomic nervous system. Now, don't think about the word sympathetic how you would normally define it, right? If you think about it that way, you'll confuse yourself here. Just think about parasympathetic, sympathetic, but forget the what you think your definition of the word sympathetic means. You know, in this circumstance, it has nothing to do with being like sympathetic to someone's disposition or something, right? It's just used to describe the branches of this part of their nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest, okay? So if you find yourself in a state of restfulness, energy conservation, and you're digesting food, then you're going to be more parasympathetically active. Because it's the parts of this division of the nervous system that promote things like energy conservation, low heart rate, low blood pressure, and digestion. So that's going to be the parasympathetic division here. So it's a completely different branch of your ANS. There's different neurons that we find here that promote these sorts of effects on your organ systems. Opposite to this, we have the sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight-flight system, okay? But it's also involved with like sexual excitement too. So we call it the 3 Fs, you guys: fight, flight, fornicate. The 3 Fs, right? So the sympathetic division is what prepares your body for the fight-flight response, right? Like if you're excited is what this means. And whether that means you're excited because you're just, extremely happy and excited in that regard, right? Or terrified and scared, it's all the same division of your ANS that's going to promote the same effect on your body, okay? So what's interesting then here, you guys, is that the sympathetic nervous system will promote energy usage. So it's going to increase your metabolism. That way you can use more energy and actually use that for like muscle contractions. And it's going to increase your blood pressure in order to help deliver nutrients to your body's tissues. Because you think about, your organs need to do different things under different times. Like, you don't need to have your heart beating really fast while you're just resting there and maybe just digesting the Indian food you had for lunch, right? But what if you're like running away from a mountain lion or something? Like you're on a hike because it's a beautiful spring day, and then there's a hungry mountain lion that just kind of pops up behind some rocks. Okay? Do you want your heart rate to be the same as you would if you were digesting? Absolutely not. If you go, your heart rate's going to start racing. And then you're going to get really sympathetically active, which is going to increase blood flow to skeletal muscle. Your blood pressure is going to skyrocket. You're going to start to release energy from energy reserves, like breaking down adipose, increasing blood sugar. All of these things are going to help you survive, right? Help you get away from that mountain lion and either fight or flight, right? So like fighting is, like as it sounds, or, there's two options, I suppose. I mean, there's a third option, but none of us would take that, right? The third option would just be accepting the imminent death and just rolling over and saying, okay, come get me, right? None of us would do that. It wouldn't make sense, right? Kind of goes against our nature. But, so parasympathetic, what's that? Rest and digest. Sympathetic? Fight, flight, and fornicate. Yeah, the 3 Fs, right? Fight, flight, fornicate. Someone recommended that actually should be the 4 Fs. Fighting, flighting, fornicating, and freezing. Because, some animals will freeze when they're scared. They kind of play dead or they freeze. Yeah, so that might be the 4th F, but we'll just keep it at 3 for now. I'm not totally convinced that freezing is sympathetic. Yeah.
What about when you get scared and you get goosebumps? Your skin, the muscles of your skin are under the somatic nervous system. Then how does the autonomic nervous system fit in there?
It's a good question. So the erector pili muscle is actually smooth muscle, not skeletal muscle. So erector pili that causes goosebumps in the skin is actually controlled by the autonomic nervous system, not the somatic nervous system. But the branch of your autonomic nervous system that controls smooth muscle in the skin, like the erector pili, is the sympathetic nervous system. So when you get goosebumps, you're sympathetically active. So you said you give the example of like when you're scared, you get goosebumps. You're sympathetically active. When else do you guys get goosebumps? If you're cold, that kind of makes sense. How are you going to want to help increase metabolism to keep your body warm? When else do you get goosebumps? I usually don't get scared. I don't think that scare me. So
I get them like when I get like I don't know
happy.
the word for it when you're like heebie-jeebie. Like
oh
it's not
really?
Scared. It's like when you have some sort of like bodily response
Yeah.
to something.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So I definitely get goosebumps when music does this for me a lot.
Yeah.
I love music. Like I hear like a good song, not a song that I hate, but like a good song. Like sometimes I get goosebumps, but that's because I'm actually getting sympathetically active. Because sympathetic activity is just it's a general excitement of your nervous system and body, right? So it doesn't mean that like I want to fight, flight, and fornicate after hearing that song. It just means that generally, just means like I'm generally excited. So then, okay, how can we separate these things? Because if there's different divisions, they must be made of different things. So the sympathetic nervous system has its own complete set of neurons. The parasympathetic nervous system has its own complete set of neurons. They don't overlap. Like you don't have nerves that carry both parasympathetic and sympathetic information. They actually use different nerve pathways. Okay? So we see here on this slide is just a general overview of the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. You'll notice here that most of your parasympathetic nerves are actually cranial nerves. So cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 are all nerves that carry parasympathetic information to the head, neck, and thoracic and abdominal viscera. So what was the wanderer of this example? The vagus nerve. You got it. So cranial nerve number 10, vagus nerve, goes all the way down your neck. It'll innervate the larynx for speech. It goes down into the thoracic cavity where it can control things like heart rate, blood pressure, as well as a smooth muscle diameter of your airways. But the vagus nerve can also continue down to the abdominal cavity and control the functions of digestion, right? But it's a cranial nerve, so it's actually coming from the brain, not the spinal cord. But most parasympathetic nerves are actually going to be cranial nerves, not spinal nerves. However, there are some pelvic nerves here, like in the sacral spinal nerves, that carry some parasympathetic information. But they're going to carry parasympathetic input to your pelvic organs. So what organs do you find in your pelvic cavity? Internal reproductive organs, urinary bladder, and rectum. Good. So what do you guys think would be the effect of parasympathetic nerves on your urinary bladder? Yeah, it's going to help you contract the smooth muscle to urinate. Like you're going to urinate when you're parasympathetically active, when you're resting and digesting. That's an appropriate time to urinate, right? You won't urinate when you're sympathetically active. It's made more difficult. It's actually inhibited. Now, what do you guys think the parasympathetic sacral spinal nerves are going to do to your rectum? Also, yeah, and help initiate relaxation of smooth muscle in the rectum to allow you to defecate, right? Yeah.
So one of the things that happens when you're overly frightened sometimes is you pee.
Yeah.
So is that like a loss of control?
I think it's just general. So if you're frightened and you pee because you're frightened, I think it's just because your nervous system is just generally excited, and that because of excitement of both systems, that one of the responses is a little bit of pee comes out. But you'll never have a circumstance where you're so frightened that you'll just continuously urinate, right? I think it's just kind of a little bit leaks out, but it's not like you're gonna lose the entire volume of your bladder. But that is a good point.
Yeah, because it's one of the things that
Right.
Some people.
Good. Yes, exactly. It's true. Or they might. So
I'm sorry.
that's all right. So the sympathetic division. The sympathetic division, you guys. What's our catchphrase for sympathetic nervous system? Fight, flight. Right? Exactly. So if you're fighting, flighting, then you're sympathetically active or fornicating. Now you'll notice that most sympathetic nerves come from the thoracic spine. So the thoracic spinal nerves carry sympathetic nervous system information, and a little bit of the lumbar nerves do too. Not many. I think it's like L1, maybe even L2. But so mostly thoracic spinal nerves carry sympathetic input. So where do you guys think these sympathetic nerves go? What would these connect to then? These sympathetic nerves. They're cut here, so you can't see where they connect. But where would they connect? Yeah, internal organs like the heart, your lungs, digestive organs. Even though it's not involved with promoting digestion, it can inhibit digestion, which is almost just as important because you don't want to always be digesting, right? What do you guys think the sympathetic nerves do to your urinary bladder? You're right. They prevent smooth muscle contraction, so they inhibit your urinary bladder from contracting. And what do you guys think? What do you guys think the sympathetic nerves do to the rectum? They inhibit defecation, but the way they do that is they promote smooth muscle contraction. That way the sphincters stay shut and so feces don't just leave. Makes sense, right?
What a world.
Yeah. I know. It's amazing. And we take this stuff for granted. So if we compare the sympathetic division versus the parasympathetic division to the sympathetic division, we find is that they actually look differently, right? So we still have our preganglionic neuron and our postganglionic neuron. So here's the preganglionic neuron again, the postganglionic neuron. But where do most parasympathetic nerves arise from? Parasympathetic nerves arise from mostly the cranial nerves, right? So 3, 7, 9, and 10. So if they're cranial nerves, where would the cell body of this preganglionic neuron be then? In a brain nucleus of some sort, right? Probably in the brainstem somewhere. Good, exactly. And then you'll have an axon that exits through the cranial nerve to some sort of ganglion elsewhere in the head, neck, or somewhere in the thorax and abdomen. And that synapse is on a postganglionic neuron here, which is short. If the postganglionic neuron is short, what does that tell us about the position of this ganglia then in the body? Yeah, it's near the target organ, right? It's either on or in the target organ. It's close to it because the postganglionic neuron here is shorter. Now, if we look at the sympathetic division, see our sympathetic neuron is actually short and the postganglionic neuron here is long. So first of all, where are our cell bodies of preganglionic sympathetic neurons? Thoracic spine, specifically the thoracic area. Lateral horns. Remember the cell bodies of preganglionic sympathetic neurons are in the lateral horns of the spinal cord. Then we have an axon that goes out to the spinal cord and synapses on a postganglionic neuron here within the ganglia. But see, the ganglia is actually not that far away from the spinal cord, right? So it means our sympathetic ganglia are actually close to the spinal cord. In fact, you find them forming a long chain of ganglia right next to the spinal cord. I mean, it's outside of the spinal cavity, but it's near the spinal cord. So that means our postganglionic neuron is long, and it's more highly branched, and it connects onto the peripheral effector organ. What's interesting here, you guys, is that both divisions connect to the same organs. So that you can have this pathway connecting to the heart, and this pathway connecting to the heart. But what do you guys think would be the effect of these neurons stimulating the heart? If these neurons are sending action potentials towards the heart, yeah, if it's parasympathetic, it's going to slow your heart rate down, which also helps decrease blood flow and blood pressure. What about the sympathetic nerve pathway going to the heart? Yeah, it's going to speed up your heart rate, which is going to increase blood pressure and blood flow. You got it. But what this means, though, is that your organs are innervated or connected to by both divisions at any moment in time. So what that means is that what your organs are doing is determined by the effect of both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions. So then what determines the net effect on the organ then? How do we even get the heart rate to speed up or slow down? It does relate to chemicals, right? But what if I told you guys that these actually have opposite effects? So why doesn't the parasympathetic division just cancel out the effects of the sympathetic division?
Because they're receiving more from the sympathetic at that time.
Yeah, you might have more activity in one division versus the other. So if your heart rate's really fast, what does that tell us about your sympathetic nervous system? It's very active, right? But what does that tell us about our parasympathetic nervous system? It's less active, yeah. Now, you'll never have a circumstance where your parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous systems are off. It's just that one system will be more active than the other. And that determines the net effect on that organ. So if your heart rate's speeding up, then you're just more sympathetically active. But you're still parasympathetically active, just not as much. So the other one kind of dominates the net effect on that organ. But we call this dynamic antagonism because they're both sort of pulling on that organ, figuratively, obviously, in the sense that they're trying to determine the effect on that organ in different ways. One system might be trying to slow your heart rate down. Another system could be trying to speed it up. But whichever one's more active will have the net effect on that organ, right? So something to keep in mind. Now, our parasympathetic division is also called the craniosacral division. Why would that be, guys? Why do you think it's called the craniosacral division? You got it. Because it involves cranial nerves and spinal nerves, right? So 3, 7, 9, and 10 are the cranial nerves that carry parasympathetic input. And then we have several sacral spinal nerves that carry some parasympathetic input to the pelvic organs, like reproductive organs, urinary bladder, rectum. Makes sense. Now, these ganglionic neurons are found either in the target organ or on the target organ, okay? Because the preganglionic neuron is very long in the parasympathetic nervous system, which means the postganglionic neuron is very far from the brain or spinal cord, and it's either in or on that target organ, right? So if it's found close to the target organ, we call it terminal ganglia. If it's actually in the target organ, we call it intramural ganglia. So it's actually in the organ itself. So sometimes you don't even see a parasympathetic ganglia because it might actually be in the wall of the heart itself. So you actually have these nerve fibers that are actually in the organ, not outside of it. But it's still considered a ganglia because you have a collection of neuron cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. Now, what this slide is showing you guys is a good summary of the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's called the craniosacral division because it mostly involves cranial nerves and sacrospinal nerves. So which cranial nerves carry parasympathetic input? Which cranial nerves carry parasympathetic input?
3, 7, 9, and 10.
Yeah, you got it. 3, 7, 9, and 10. So what's cranial nerve number 3? Oculomotor. So oculomotor was motor information, right? But it carries autonomic motor to some of the glands that are involved with tear production. So it's going to help regulate the production of tears, which is interesting. Does that make sense? How about cranial nerve number 7? Which one's that, you guys? Facial nerve, yeah. And so facial nerve was sensory, motor, or both? It's both. Good. We know it's motor to most of the muscles of the face, and there's sensory for the tongue. But there's also autonomic motor out to some of the glands for saliva production. So your facial nerve can go to some of your salivary glands and excite those glands to produce saliva, right? Because it's parasympathetic. If you're resting and digesting, you will produce saliva. Makes sense? And so what about cranial nerve number 10? Vagus nerve. All this. Remember the wander? You can tell it's even kind of wandering all. You're saying it's starting your brainstem here, but look, it goes all the way down to the heart, the airways of your respiratory tract, your digestive organs, your kidneys, and even some of the gonads receive information from the vagus nerves. So what do you guys think would be the parasympathetic effect on the heart via the vagus nerve? Slow down heart rate. Good. What about blood pressure? To lower blood pressure. Good. How about the parasympathetic effect on your airways of your lungs? If you're resting, how much airflow do you need? Not as much, right? So then what the parasympathetic nervous system does to your airways is it causes constriction of your airways because you don't need that much airflow if you're just chilling, right? If you're just resting, you don't need a lot of airflow. Makes sense? What about the effect of the vagus nerve on your digestive organs? Increases digestive activity. So you might wonder, what does that mean? Well, digestive activity would be, churning of smooth muscle on those organs to help move these things around and mix your food around. Also stimulating secretions of digestive juices from like the pancreas, the liver, the stomach. That's stimulated by the vagus nerve. Okay. And then if it's a pelvic organ, you guys, it's going to receive input from the sacral division here. So sacrospinal nerves also carry some parasympathetic input. What do you guys think would be the parasympathetic input on your reproductive organs? It actually is, yeah. Your parasympathetic nervous system actually is what stimulates sexual excitement. So, if you're male or female and there's erectile tissues engorging with blood, in both males and females, females' clitoris can engorge with blood, and males' the penis can engorge with blood. But that both occurs during sexual excitement. That's a parasympathetic function, right? But how does that fit with the whole sympathetic thing about fornication? Well, the sympathetic effect on the reproductive system is actually climax. So orgasm is actually a sympathetic effect, not parasympathetic. So you have to be parasympathetically active to get sexually excited, but then it's the sympathetic nervous system that actually stimulates orgasm. It's kind of interesting. What do you guys think would be the parasympathetic effect on the urinary bladder? Contraction. So it's going to cause the smooth muscle of your urinary bladder to contract. That way you can micturate or urinate. That's a rest and digest kind of function. Makes sense. Have you guys ever heard of the whole idea about being pee shy? Well, being pee shy is just you're too sympathetically active to urinate, right? And so if you're pee shy, it's kind of calm yourself down and stop being so sympathetically active in order for the urine to be able to leave your body. So it's kind of interesting. So the cranial components of your parasympathetic nervous system that include oculomotor, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. Remember, the oculomotor nerve is cranial nerve number 3. It has preganglionic cell bodies in the midbrain, which then go to ciliary ganglia near the eye or orbit, and these postganglionic neurons go to the ciliary muscle of your eye and the pupillary muscle of your iris. So the oculomotor nerve helps control the shape of your lens and the diameter of your pupil. What do you guys think happens to your pupil if you're parasympathetically active? Do you guys think you think it's large or small? It's small. You got it. So if your pupil is constricted, that's actually the parasympathetic nervous system that does that. So what this means is you can look at someone's pupils and get a sense about their internal states, right? You can look at someone's pupils and know whether they're sympathetically active or parasympathetically active. The effect of the parasympathetic nervous system on the pupillary constrictor muscle is it causes your pupil to constrict. It gets more narrow. So if you're very relaxed, your pupils will actually be constricted, not dilated. So it's kind of interesting. Now the facial nerve here is cranial nerve number 7. It has a pterygopalatine ganglia that innervates some of the lacrimal glands for tears, as well as the other glands of your nasal cavity, oral cavity, and palate. So you might wonder, well, what glands would these be? Well, they're mucus glands and salivary glands involved with digestion. And then the chorda tympani is a branch of facial nerve that goes to something called the submandibular ganglion, and it innervates the sublingual salivary gland. So if you're producing saliva from your sublingual gland beneath your tongue, that's an effect of facial nerve. But what do you guys think will be the effect of the sympathetic nervous system on salivary glands? No, sympathetic nervous system.
Sympathetic's gonna decrease.
Yeah, you got it. If you're sympathetically active, you don't produce saliva. Have you guys ever found yourself where you're so excited or scared that you get dry mouth? Yeah, exactly. And so that's actually a sympathetic effect. Because you're so sympathetically active, you just stop producing saliva. I used to get this way when I would actually start giving lectures, like earlier on, when I was a student and earlier while I was teaching, that I was so nervous that my mouth would get really dry, and I had trouble talking. And I get more scared because I had trouble talking, and my mouth would get drier, and it's kind of interesting. But the normal parasympathetic effect is to actually excite salivary gland release. So the glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve number 9. And we have preganglionic neurons that exit the brainstem. It goes to an otic ganglion that also goes to the parotid salivary gland. So there's even more saliva production through glossopharyngeal nerve. And then the big one here, guys, vagus nerve, right? So vagus comes from the Latin vaga, which means to wander or travel. And it projects inferiorly through the neck, and it supplies innervation to thoracic and abdominal organs. But there are multiple branches along the way. Like the recurrent laryngeal branch of vagus goes to your larynx for speech production. But that's not the autonomic function of the vagus. Remember, the autonomic functions are for unconscious control of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. So your vagus nerve then has multiple branches then that go to the smooth muscle of your airway, goes to the cardiac muscle of your heart, the smooth muscle of your digestive organs, and the glands of your digestive organs to all promote digestion, right? And it makes sense that the vagus nerve promotes digestion because it's a nerve involved with rest and digest, hence the name. What do you guys think would happen if your vagus nerves were cut?
You would be able to drag less.
Yeah, you got it. You'd have difficulty with digestion. In fact, I have another textbook that says that if you cut your vagus nerves, it's not compatible with life. Because if you can't digest, you can't absorb nutrients, which means you won't live very long. So luckily we have vagus nerves, and they help us digest. What's that? And well, it's involved with slowing your heart rate down. Now the vagus nerve here has trunks that go through the respiratory diaphragm, but it's not involved with breathing. However, it does go through other ganglia that actually go to organs inside your abdominal cavity. So it increases smooth muscle motility, so it helps move and digest food mechanically. And it also goes to the secretory organs of your digestive tract, like your pancreas, your liver, your gallbladder, because it increases the secretion of digestive juices. Now, the pelvic splanchnic nerves include the sacral spinal nerves here, and these actually contribute to something called the hypogastric plexus, which you find in the hypogastric region near your pelvis. And this goes to basically pelvic organs. Think of your rectum, which is the end of your large intestine, reproductive organs, urinary bladder, and the ureters. So what's the parasympathetic effect on the urinary bladder? Stimulate contraction, exactly. What do you guys think is the parasympathetic effect on reproductive organs? You can say it. It's okay.
Exciting.
Yeah, exciting. Yeah, sexual excitement, right? What's the parasympathetic effect on your rectum? Constrict the sphincter muscles of your anus and prevent defecation. Makes sense. Now, the sympathetic division we call the thoracolumbar division because our preganglionic neurons are found in the lateral horns of the thoracic and first two lumbar spinal segments. So if most of your sympathetic nervous system comes from the spinal cord, what does this mean for people with spinal cord injury like above T1? Like let's say if you had a spinal cord injury at C7, what are you going to lose?
A lot of these bodily functions won't work.
You're going to lose parasympathetic or sympathetic function?
Sympathetic.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of difficulty with sympathetic functions.
And you'll have some difficulty with parasympathetic.
And
as well.
exactly, and some difficulty with parasympathetic because there's some parasympathetic nerves in the pelvic organs. Exactly. Now, luckily though, we don't need a sympathetic nervous system to survive. We do need a parasympathetic nervous system to survive though. This is why we can't live without vagus nerves. This is why if someone has spinal cord injury and they lose communication of their brain and sympathetic nervous system, they can still function relatively okay. They might have some problems that can be life-threatening, but they can live a fairly adequate life, if that makes sense. Now, it's more complex than the parasympathetic nervous system, though, because our sympathetic nervous system has more branches that are all interconnected and allows for more complex processing of information. Now, what we find then is that our preganglionic neurons are found in the lateral horns of the thoracic and first two lumbar spinal cord segments. They exit through the ventral roots towards spinal nerves and then synapse on the postganglionic neurons here in what's called the sympathetic chain ganglia. So the sympathetic chain ganglia are a long chain of nerves that go up and down your thoracic area, and it houses the postganglionic neurons of your sympathetic nervous system. You can see from there, those postsympathetic neurons then can actually, our postganglionic sympathetic neurons can actually attach to lots of different, glands, muscle, and other organs throughout your body. So what do you guys think would be the sympathetic effect on salivary gland production? Decrease salivary gland activity. Makes sense. But this is because, you don't always need it, exactly. And you don't stop producing saliva even if you're not fully sympathetically active, right? Like even right now, if we're all resting and digesting, we're still making some saliva because we're still parasympathetically active to a degree, right? Or even if you're excited, you're still gonna make some saliva, if that makes sense. What do you guys think would be the sympathetic effect on your heart? Increase heart rate and muscle contractility. Good. How about the sympathetic effect on your airways? Dilate your airways. Good. So it helps with smooth muscle relaxation. It dilates your airways to increase airflow. Why would you need more airflow if you're sympathetically active? Yeah, to help fight, flight, fornicate, right? You didn't need a lot of airflow to help, absorb enough oxygen to maintain your metabolism. What about the sympathetic effect on your digestive organs? It slows it down, right? Or inhibits digestion. Makes sense. You don't need to be digesting if you're sympathetically active. What about the sympathetic effect on your kidneys, like for urine production? Also decreases urine production. You got it. So the sympathetic effect on your kidneys, it actually decreases the rate of urine production because you don't need to be making urine if you're fighting, flying, fornicating, right? And also because urine is made from blood, you don't want to lose your blood volume because blood volume and blood pressure are proportional. So if you start making a lot of urine, you're also losing blood volume, which means your blood pressure would get lower, which wouldn't make sense if you're sympathetically active. You want to maintain your blood pressure high enough to do those things. That way, you actually inhibit urine formation by the kidneys. What about the sympathetic effect on your urinary bladder? Inhibits bladder contraction. This is why people get like pee shy, because they can't get their bladders to contract because they're too sympathetically active. What about the sympathetic effect on the reproductive structures? So if the parasympathetic nervous system was involved with sexual excitement, what was the sympathetic nervous system? Yeah, orgasm. So I've had another student recommend that instead of saying fight, flight, fornicate, it should be fight, flight, finishing. Kind of makes sense actually, because the sympathetic nervous system is involved with orgasm. Now, what we find then, you guys, we have sympathetic trunks and ganglia. The sympathetic trunks are located anterior to spinal nerves and they're lateral to the vertebral column. And the trunk ganglia are all along the thoracic spine, and they're associated with each spinal nerve. Now, the cervical portion of the sympathetic trunk is found in the superior, middle, and inferior ganglia, which then go up to the head and neck. So if you look at this in cadaver dissection, what we find then is all of these right here are the sympathetic chain ganglia. So you see the little collection of neuron cell bodies here, and then the spinal nerves then continue outward through all of the ribs. So this would be just posterior to the lungs, and the heart's removed too. So here's the aorta nearby as well. Now, our sympathetic pathways are varied and diverse. So what we find then, you guys, is that axons exit the sympathetic trunk ganglia by a variety of mechanisms. We have a spinal nerve pathway, postganglionic nerve pathway, a splanchnic nerve pathway, and an adrenal medulla pathway. Now, for the spinal nerve pathway, what we find then, you guys, is that our preganglionic neuron then goes through the sympathetic trunk, synapses on the postganglionic neuron, which has an axon that goes superior and then exits out towards some smooth muscle like blood vessels or erector pili. Now, this differs from the postganglionic sympathetic nerve pathway because it actually will exit through the, what we'll call white ramus communicantes here, and it goes and connects to two neurons. We have one in the proximal ganglia here and one in the superior ganglia, and there's actually multiple ways for postganglionic neurons to exit the spinal cord in this regard. And this is actually going to help protect against, loss of function with nerve injury. Like, what if you broke this spinal nerve? Well, because information also exits through another point, then you won't lose all function of your heart, right? Which is nice. And what we find then here is that it actually can connect to the heart in multiple ways by helping to exit the spinal cord in multiple ways. Now, for the splanchnic nerve pathway, it's similar in the sense that we actually have preganglionic neurons here, but our preganglionic neurons actually have axons that can exit through different routes. And by exiting through different routes, then again, you don't lose entire function if you just damage one spinal nerve. That way, there's another way for information to get out to a peripheral ganglia in order to control important functions like inhibiting digestion within your intestine while you're sympathetically active. And the last pathway here, you guys, is called the adrenal medulla pathway, because part of your sympathetic nervous system actually uses hormones. So we find then, you guys, is that for this pathway, we see that we have preganglionic neurons that exit the spinal cord, and then they synapse on cells within the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is a series of cells you find in a gland that sits right on top of your kidneys, and they release some hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine is also called adrenaline. Norepinephrine is also called noradrenaline. So this is where those hormones come from. I mean, you guys know this, right? Like if you're excited, you start releasing a lot of epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. But they're sympathetic hormones. This is just another way for your sympathetic nervous system to communicate with organs is through hormonal communication, because hormones are transported in blood, and then from blood they get spread all throughout the body, wherever blood goes. Then those hormones can actually bind to receptors on those tissues and exert a sympathetic effect in that regard. So that for some parts of your sympathetic nervous system, you don't have to have neurons connecting to the organ directly. You can actually stimulate the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine from your adrenal gland, and that can go into the bloodstream, or can actually just excite tissues in that way without having to directly connect to the organ or tissue using a neuron. So just kind of interesting there. We'll stop there.